All right. So I'm going to show you how to implement a Spotify API call to search for songs in a React Native application. Here's a little look at what we're going to build today. So we have a search bar here, and if you press in the search bar, you can search for a song. You can search by album. So The Greatest Showman, and we'll come up with all the Greatest Showman soundtracks. You can also search by artist, or you can search by the title of a song, like Polaroid, if I could spell. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. So right now we just have an empty page. I think the first place that we want to start is by putting in a search bar, which won't be too bad. So right here I have a search bar already kind of thought of with our search bar JS. And I'm going to bring in what we're going to the code for our search bar, but it's just going to be a component that we can put into our music search page with a constructor that takes in that text that the user puts in and sets the state with that text, or if there's no text, it's going to be an empty string. The next thing that it's going to do is it's going to have this handle change text that's called with the on change text down here. All right, so it's going to take the new text from the user and it's going to set the state of text to that new text, and then come here and pass the new text to on change. All right, so down here we'll take the text, we'll set the state of text to this, we'll set text to the state, and we can return a search bar with the placeholder of search for a song. It can handle the text that's being input, and the value that the user puts in will be this text here. So we'll go ahead and save that and come back to our music search, and then we can add our search bar in right under, we're going to put it right under our header. Let me bring that in. Okay, so here I've got it setting text in our search bar as the query, which is great. Up here in my state, I've got the query that can be set, but I'm not referring to it as this.state down here. So what I'm going to do is in my right after my render, I'm going to have a constant variable with that query value from the state, so that I can then pass it to the search bar and handle the text change from there. The next thing that we need to do is I have this handle search change right here, and we need to create that. This shows every time that we start a new search, we want to start with an empty array of songs and set the input as the query to the API. So we'll create a handle search change function right here that does exactly that. It sets the state. Empty is false. We have something in our search. We're going to set the query to text. Our offset and song. So offset is for our API call. We'll talk about that in just a second. And then our song so far is an empty array. This load next page will come with our API call as well to pull in the songs, and then we'll have a constant variable of just 20, so we're only going to load 20 at a time of our songs, and we'll go through that. So good. So far we've got our search bar working. Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about implementing the Spotify API. So if you go online, Spotify actually has some really great documentation on their API call. There's an authorization guide here where you can have users use their authorization codes to get access to the API call. Or you can also just have a generalized access to the API call that will give really limited use to the Spotify features, but it works for our purposes. What you need to do is create an account at the developer.spotify.com and create a project. So I have my project right here, and it's created my client ID and my client secret. Those will be input into our Spotify token. We'll make a JS file here for our Spotify token. And this is going to have our endpoint, it will have our API call prefix and request a new token to say, hey, I'm authorized to access this API call. So I've got my API prefix here, accounts.spotify.com/API, my client ID and my client secret, and then you have to encode that to base64 for it to work as a parameter to our token, to get our token. So if you read through the documentation, it kind of will help you get through this, but here's where I use my credentials that I created up here. And we're just going to do a client credential and get our access token as a JSON object and then return that new token. So that looks good as far as our token goes. The next thing we're going to do is do our Spotify search. And this is something else that you can read about on the website. But what I'll point out here, so we're going to have our set, offset, limit, query, and Spotify token that will be set in our music search page over here. But right here, we have our prefix. We're going to search on these types. We're going to search on album, artist, track, and playlist. Here's our query that the user input, and then there's the wildcard so that it will search for anything that has the search text, and then anything after the search text will also be searched on. And then again, it will return a JSON object, and then I just mapped that JSON object with these different titles for each item. So I'll go ahead and save that. Back in our music search, we'll need to set the state up for our API call, which is what's happened right here. We have our query. If we're fetching our API call, we want to know that. If the token is fetching, we want to know that, so we have some booleans there to kind of catch that. So here is how we're going to call our API call. We'll call it load next page. We'll set all of these constants to whatever's in the state and check to see if fetching and empty is true. And if it is, we'll just return nothing. Then we want to set, if we're calling this, we want to set the state of is fetching to true, and then call our Spotify API call. We have our offset here, our page, or our limit. We're only going to call for 20 items at a time, which is set up here, page 20. The query that's going to be input by the user, and then get our Spotify token. So if there's no songs in our new songs right here, then either something's wrong or the user just put in a stupid query, which, could happen. And so we'll set the state of is empty to true. Otherwise, we're going to set this state to the is fetching is false, and we're going to get all of those new songs, and we're going to append it to the array of songs that we already have. And then we're going to reset our offset to whatever the offset currently was plus 20. Another thing that we need to do is we need to refresh the token. And this is explained a little bit in the Spotify documentation, but you should be refreshing your token every so often so that you can access that API call. So we'll just call that function that we created in Spotify token over here, set the state of is token fetching to true, create that new token, and then set the Spotify token in our state to the new token. Because we are loading data from a remote endpoint, we need to call our load next page and this refresh token in the component did mount and will mount. So I'll set that up top here, right under our constructor. This is just so that our app will wait for those functions to be complete. All right, so now we have our API set up, and we want to have a place that our items can be output to. So I have this listing component right here, and what I've used is this flat list from React Native. Again, you can look online, you can search this, but it's really helpful, and what it does is it iterates through data that you send it, and it renders a flat, like right here, rendering simple flat lists. So it will render items from the data that you give it, and then you can send another component, just that single item, to create a list of all of the things in that array that you gave to the flat list. So here I've implemented that we'll send this flat list our songs, and we'll call that items. And then we set our data to items, and then we're rendering each item and sending that to our list item component. So then over here in our list item component, we can access that item through our props. And so I just set up a card to display the different results of the songs that we will see from our search result. So this .props.item.image URI, I can get to that image URI because of how we mapped the API results, the JSON object, and then passing it in the props. So yeah, we're going to display the image, the title, the album, and the artist. So the next step is then to take our listing, because right now our listing has all of our list items loaded into it. So we have our listing, and we want to put that in our music search. So we'll come down to our render. And let's see. I'm going to go ahead and put this in between the song queue. And I'll talk about this. So we're going to see if is fetching is true, and if that's true and our songs.length is 0. Oh, by the way, I'll bring songs in here. Then we want to show an activity indicator because it's doing work. We don't have results yet. Otherwise, once is fetching is false and we have songs in our array, we're going to output our listing with items. So here we have our songs, and we also need to do is fetching here. Cool. And then on end reached. So this means once we've reached the 20, what do we want to do? Like, because we're only loading 20 songs at a time. So once we've reached 20, what do we want to do? And we're just going to write another listening function called handle end reached. And that's gonna just call load next page. All right, so this should be enough to get us started to be able to see and search for different songs using the Spotify API. Let's go ahead and check it out.